Well, the original question was, how have you changed?
Do you see? Yes, your Christian identity.
Yes.
Your Christian identity.
My Christian identity.
Yeah, your attitude.
Well, the only thing I can say with any certitude is that I've been steadily getting worse.
So maybe you're getting.
So I was much more of a Christian when I was in my first conversion. I went to Mass every day and so on. I think going to Mass every day is very important for those who are attracted to it. But I must say, all the devotions that I once leaned on have kind of changed. And I don't lean too much on anything. So I guess I'm getting to be either an atheist or an iconoclast. But I don't recommend doing that too soon, I would. After all, when you said you've been to the office 6 or 7 hours a day for 40 years, I mean, you might miss a little hour once in a while without too much damage. Mm-hmm. And so I think that Christianity is not in the, it begins with the externals, and it's supported by the externals, and certain ones, especially for each of us. But the dark nights take all that away from you. Any human prop that you have just goes away. So you have a whole different attitude towards your religion, which I don't think it's not an indifference towards it. It's just that you see it from a different perspective. That is extremely liberating. In other words, I don't want to say you don't need it anymore. That wouldn't be true, because everything you are has been the gift of that institution. But you're not dependent on the institutional structures the way you do in an earlier period. Hence you're open, I think, to the values of other religions and to recognize grace when it's occurring in other denominations or religions, and that while your loyalty to your own religion continues, it's not a naive loyalty, so that you are perfectly capable of recognizing the shortcomings of your own religion or church or parish without being upset by it. Because this purity of heart I spoke about this afternoon is such that I think God deliberately leaves, it's dangerous to second guess God, but I put this out for what it's worth, and you can shoot me after the services. But it seems to me to have grown on me over the years that God and us are, each of us, are constantly, or at least us, changing, so that the dependencies that we had, even the most subtle cultural conditioning, is addressed one by one by the searching light of the divine spirit, so that nothing except the love of God is left in you, so that even the desire to see the church succeed, or even the witness of seeing the church through certain authorities sabotage some of its best inspirations, doesn't bother you anymore, because you see that it is God asking you to give up even, shall I say it, the church, or at least so that you don't have any attachments whatsoever to anything whatsoever. Now, this is what I think Jesus means when he says, if you want to find out who you really are, bring yourself to nothing, no thing, no identification. And that's what I'm interested in as a project at this time of life. But I don't recommend it for a teenager.
Well, what do you say that you've internalized it? At least what I'm hearing you say, in some way you've internalized so much of it, like it's all in you anyway. It's part of your interior life. So somehow you can be in the presence of that. Is that? Do I hear you saying something like that, or do you here?
I don't know. I hope so. But I think there is a process of interiorization. I appeal to you, other folks here.
Right.
You know, I'm thinking this leads into what happens to Christ consciousness.
Right.
Where is the Christ consciousness?
Well, I think you become Christ consciousness. So there's a difference between being conscious of Christ, that's dualism. Being Christ consciousness is unitive. But I think that presupposes a lot of purification in the dark nights. I recommend them highly.
So what
Nothing like it. It's the divine love is purifying you as the fires of purgatory does, according to St. John of the Cross. So in a sense, the worse it is, the better it is. Excuse me. That doesn't sound too Jansenistic for you, for this crowd. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that whole. I was thinking about St. Paul. You know, that Paul is a very good example of that business of what would you call an advanced Christ consciousness is. I think. Okay, he's got a love for Christ as other, but the thing that really drives him is a kind of Christ energy that's inside him.
Yes,
you know,
inside.
It's an energy that's in him,
out.
and a light that's in him, and that from the center of his personality is moving him, is animating him. You know? He's certainly not a complete, what would you say, complete figure on every side, but as far as that, I think he's the best example we have, right in the New Testament, of that consciousness.
Yes. Another text comes to my mind, if I might just add it. Again from Paul, he says, if we knew Christ according to the flesh, we know him now no longer that way. Now, what does that mean? What would you fundamentalists do with that? I don't imagine there are too many of you here.
No, but let me take that on like the other pole of being, there's the mystical unity of, or the metaphysical. This is the Evelyn Underhill distinction that you brought out, and the nuptial. And what if I'm going to take the nuptial unitive Christ consciousness? It doesn't feel like a dark night. I mean, it doesn't have the feel of it in its language. It's more like the nuptial, the unity, the consciousness is blended so that you act as Christ and you're put on the mind of Christ. You know, and Christ is your consciousness, as close as your own consciousness is to yourself. See, I guess I'm not up at that unitive state. I can tell because I can't quite get there, even conceptually. I do know the Advitic way, the whole unitive has got to be logical and everything. But as far as a spiritual practice and where it leads, to move metaphysical and Christ consciousness into the end stage of suffering, which is what I've just kind of heard you say.
Did I say anything about an end stage?
Oh, maybe not.
No.
Ending stage. I mean, it's pretty final.
What?
There's
Death?
yes.
Well, excuse me, I just didn't quite follow you in what you thought
Well,
I said.
metaphysical, in other words, an ontological unity. Can you help us out here?
No, there's no ontological. If you say I said it was an ontological unity, I'll
Then
be hearing
you'd be
from
God, yes.
Cardinal Ratzinger shortly.
Right.
No, it's not an ontological unity. It's a spiritual unity. It's a sharing the divine life.
Yeah.
So much that one is as if one were one with God.
Yeah,
St. John of the Cross puts it, but one isn't God in the numerical sense of the word, or theologically.
And when you mentioned the nuptial relationship, that seems to be a different perspective on the same thing. Because Evelyn Underhill talks about the metaphysical, in which I think it's your identity that opens up to the divine, so that it's as if you're in the divine ground. And it's not so relational. Relationship almost gets swallowed up into that identity. Whereas in the nuptial relationship, it's the beloved. It's the bridegroom and the bride. So I think in the nuptial one, you are relating to Christ or the Word as other, you know, and it's highly affective. It's very much the heart. Okay, so there, I think that the equivalent of the dark night would probably be the absence of the beloved. That's the way it's expressed, you know, in the Song of Songs and the commentaries on the songs.
Come and go. Yes.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is I'm not recommending this level because I don't know it, you know, experientially either. But all I'm saying is that I think our idea of the Christian journey should be open to its full development, even though few people may attain to it. Just so, because the nuptial, the bridal mysticism of the Middle Ages, which is so beautiful, is wonderful. But in the same Middle Ages, some of those Cistercian women who are so extraordinary go far beyond the men in speaking about the unitive level, in which they describe the God as beyond being and non-being. I mean, they've
Take it to new
in
heights.
other words, there's beyond bridal mysticism, which is wonderful grace. I hope we all attain that, and maybe most of you would settle for that.
I would.
It would be wonderful. But that this possibility that Christ has not only invited us to union, but to unity in the priestly prayer, that they may be one as the Father are one. So when you become the Word, or when you become totally assimilated to the Word, then in that sense you are Christ. So the Christ consciousness is in you, you're exercising. In other words, you're so in union with Christ that there's no more a distinction psychologically.
Now, this is my next question on that, though. Then, wouldn't you be beyond this false self-system being such a predominant
Oh, sure, that would
exercise?
get burned out in
Yeah,
your
there wouldn't
bridal
be-
mysticism. But beyond the false self, there's our attachment to an identity. And as long as that identity is particular, then there's more work to be done, because in actual fact, at the deepest level, we are only what God has made us, the true self, and a manifestation of unconditional love. So unconditional love has no distinctions between two people. It's one thing. That's the way I think of the Christian mystics and some of the Buddhists explain it. So I'm not criticizing.
No, but if
everything.
identity would be what God gives you, and if maybe God gives you a right sense of identity, which is humility, and you wouldn't have any attachment to your identity, wouldn't that be it too?
Well, if you're not attached to your identity, then you don't have an identity in the language I'm using. So again, it's a question of understanding how the terms are being used. In other words, we don't lose the creative self that God has given us in the beginning. I don't think you can say that gets merged into God, as some of the Eastern religions do, and still be a Christian. But I think that the practical or psychological experience of unity makes one feel, at least according to John of the Cross, as if you were God. And this is backed up by other mystics, so that you don't have that duality, and there's no interest in the self. I mean, that's when the saints say, well, I don't care if they go to hell.
Right.
Because they only want God's will. That's a little extreme, I must say. But that's what I'm trying to just say in that diagram, that beyond resting in God is being God, which is to all practical purposes.
Well, I understand Christ consciousness then in a lower sense. I understand it as something very sort of attainable if you really put on the mind of Christ, and as you are conscious of yourself, you have an inclusive consciousness of Christ at whatever level Christ gives you. And so that you would try to do the will of God instead of your own will, or your own will is the will of God. I mean, it doesn't seem like it has to be quite that extraordinary. I mean, for a Christian, it seems like a Christian should be a Christ-conscious person. And Christ consciousness should be the fruit of a Christ-conscious person. As your consciousness of yourself, and then you start being conscious that you want this. That's why I come out of the kind of the devotional path myself, because I think you start being conscious of the other, and then this thing starts coming together. And it's not real up there. It's just kind of real down there.
Well, this is a place farther down yet, that's all I'm saying.
Okay.
Or farther up, as there's no geographical locations in the spiritual sphere. But all that you're saying is wonderful, and all Christians should be conscious of Christ. But suppose Christ identifies with you, how much of you will be left? And so when you're activating, it's no longer in your own name, but it's the movement of the Spirit that is becoming more and more habitual. Now, that state may be more only perfected in heaven, and I think some mystics tended to think that. But I have met some people in this world who are certainly in a state that Buddhists call no self, at the same time very, they're completely integrated in their Christian life. It's just that there seems to be something beyond being a Christian.
Okay.
And that, I can't tell you what that is, but it's a unity that surpasses any religion, because any religion is a means to the ultimate experience of God. It's not an end in itself. It can't communicate God to you. It can only direct you to God. And so at least that's
And Bruno,
my thought.
you talked about that yesterday.
Which aspect?
You just said the opposite. Do you remember?
No. I refuse to reply.
He talked about primal religion, Huxley and some of those, that they were looking for the super religion, then beyond religion, and that the place of Christ.
Oh yeah, I think that two things disappear. One is the image of Christ, and the other is image of Christ as an object, and the other is the image of self. Okay, and I think they both disappear. I don't think we lose our identity, but we lose the importance of identity, the baggage of identity, and that obsession with our identity, that terrible defensiveness, like the fear of death, that we're going to disappear. That's not how we experience it, but that's what's there. Some kind of defensive panic about our identity. I think that goes. And the image of Christ, every image of Christ somehow dissolves. But I think probably in that final state, if you read what the mystics say, it's a moving in and out of the relationship and identity, a moving in and out of oneness, or the state of unity, or the consciousness, unity consciousness, where you're not conscious of God or Christ as other, back into relationship, back into some kind of relationship with Christ, or perhaps with the Father,
But you said just beyond the image of Christ, but you're saying beyond Christ, correct?
No.
No, okay. That's what I heard.
I'm saying that the reason that your image of Christ disappears, at least in the spiritual journey, I'm infinity away from some of the experts you were talking about, when they're talking about transcendent religion. I'm not. I'm talking about the fullness of religion, which is the experience of the source of religion. And so the reason you don't have images of Christ, again I say, is because Christ consciousness has taken possession of you, so that you think and act and have the attitudes of the mind of Christ. And this is, it seems to me, is how to understand the fruits of the Spirit. There are different aspects of the mind of Christ that the Christian who's assimilated by the Word of God begins to manifest. Charity, joy, peace, gentleness. And it's not coming from ourselves, but it comes out of ourselves under the influence of a powerful grace, and then the Beatitudes are even more developed
That
gifts.
I understand.
So it's the
That's
mind
right.
of Christ that we assimilate so much that there is no image of Christ, because the reality has become a part of your inmost being. That's what I was trying to say.
No, it's completely true, I think. Often
Hard to say these things, unless you're a theologian, which I'm not.
we idealize the idea of the mind of Christ so much, I think, that we can't conceive ourselves of participating in it. But I think we do at a very elementary level, too, I think there's already a participation, even when we're just groping in the beginning, even when we're just toddling,
It's progressive. It's a process. And I think the process is open-ended. It can become more and more unified. And the word I like for the no self, which is a difficult term, best is no fixed point of identity. That's different from losing your whole identity, which I think would not be a Christian concept. But no fixed point means you don't hang on to any role or model or even religious attitude that as between you and God, as a kind of crutch in order to, so that all your crutches and substructure have been taken away by the divine purification of the dark nights and by life. And so there's just the free flow of the divine energy. and there's no reflection on self because the interest in self has been supplanted by the interest in God. But you come in and out of that, I would think. But I think it can become, the question in my mind is, could that be a permanent state, even in this life? And I suspect that it might be. And I think that the more people who get on the contemplative path, I think they're making a contribution towards the raising of the whole human family to new levels of consciousness, of which that might become more frequent.
I think the unity can become a permanent state, the point of arrival, but I don't think the absence of the relational can become permanent. I think we still probably have to, even in that final state, have to move back and forth into a sense of Christ as, between a sense of Christ as other and a sense of Christ as self somehow, I think. Or at least the relationship of Jesus to the Father, for instance, that even at the end, part of it, one component of it is relationship. I think probably the consciousness moves back and forth between the two. But
well, you might say the first consciousness is that there is another, capital O.
Yes.
And then as one advances, one becomes the other. This is what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And the final stage, and this will distress Meg maybe, is there is no other. In other words,
The self is.
God is you,
Yeah,
and you are God, and everything else is an illusion. But that may sound a bit Buddhist, but I don't think so. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm very much a Christian, and more so precisely because of the thought that what being the other means, or experiencing that there is no other, because you yourself are experiencing what it's like to be God in these attitudes that I mentioned, of the gifts and the Beatitudes, is that we're beginning to live the interior life of the Trinity, which is all love, all unconditional love, and total self-giving, total self-surrender, the one to the other. And the Spirit is the quintessence of that spirituality, which is the very person of love. So it's just that I see Christ as bringing us into the bosom of the Father, and in doing that, even sacrificing himself, so to speak, so that he isn't between us and the Father, so that the Trinitarian life is going on inside of us as well as in it. And this doesn't require self-reflection. But since the Trinity is all relationship, that's all it is, infinite relationship. There's always relationship, and hence the more one is one with God, the more one is concerned with every living thing and with every creature, and the more the veil of creatures gets thinner and thinner, so that one perceives the movement of God's love in everything that's happening, and is delighted with it. And then creatures do what they're supposed to be stepping stones to the divine presence or source, instead of being oblique objects that hide God from us because of our attachment.
Do you think this is language difference, this kind of metaphysical no self thing and the nuptial, or is it masculine and feminine approaches, or is it just what's given in your heart? I mean, I don't really desire to be a no self.
Well, who am I to recommend it?
These chairs are...
my dearest wish to be a no self, whatever that is. But you'd have to go through some of the trials I've been through in life, I think. Anything could be better than this self. But I sympathize.
Yeah, it's...
Underhill thinks it's personality of it only. After she talks about these two tracks, these two ways, she says, well, it's different temperaments or something like that. The same substantial thing is underneath both. That surprised me. Somehow I think it's deeper than that.
I do too. Temperament's fairly superficial.
Yeah, I think it's
talking about this level.
I think it's based in the Trinitarian reality in some way.
In order to find yourself, you want to lose yourself.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
precisely that, I think, is what you're talking about.
Yes,
And kind of
that's all.
be completely love.
That's all.
We started out with
Unconditional
love as, developing a relationship with God in love. And we talked about how did we fall in love, and now it's just kind of being love, just completely being one in being love.
Well, that's really the question that bridal mysticism doesn't quite address, which is a personal union. But what being unconditional love suggests is that beyond relationship, although being of its nature is relationship, but beyond relationship is something else, and any relationship, even relationship with God as we conceive of him, is the reality of infinite love or unconditional love that is God's ultimate being and the cause and being of everybody else. And so to be in contact with that love is to know who you are, because that's all we are, at least in this perspective.
So would you say as a concluding statement that all we are is love? I think somebody wrote a song about it.
That's what I was afraid of.
As you can see, we're getting close to the time now to kind of close our panel and also close the conference part. And it's just been a marvelous experience.